Have you ever wondered how some artists blend complex textures like it's nothing? It's not magic, it's just that they know probably how to use anchor points in Substance 3D Painter. So a lot of people overlook this feature because it could be a little bit cumbersome to understand it, but once you get how it works, it will give you way more control over the look of your materials. So I'm gonna show you how to set up this properly so that your layers actually talk to each other in the way that you expect. Hi, if you're new here, my name is Pablo Munoz. I'm a 3D concept artist and educator, and I help artists level up their skills in the world of 3D, all in a way that is fun, clear, and actually doable. So in this video, I want to explain a little bit what anchor points in Substance Painter are and how you can leverage the power of this feature, because it is absolutely amazing and it's going to literally revolutionize your workflow if you haven't used them. So let's go ahead and jump straight into it. All right, so here we are in Substance 3D Painter, and what I have here on the right-hand side is just a bunch of layers, and they're using anchor points. We're gonna get to that, but I wanna show you how it works. So if I paint right here, I'm actually painting a single black and white image, but then I'm referencing that to create this effect of the scars, right? So this is gonna be really cool. It's just a practical thing that I thought we can set up together just to show you how this works. But in order to understand the anchor points, I want to show you in a much simpler scenario. So I want to jump into Photoshop just for a second, and I have just a single document with a gray background. Now in Photoshop, I'm just going to go ahead and paint something like this, right? Just a couple of things, nothing too crazy, just a couple of scribbles. Now this would be the equivalent as painting my mask in Painter. But if I go ahead and convert this into a smart object, this is, at least to me, this is how I see it, and I think it's going to be the simplest way to understand it, especially if you know Photoshop. If you convert this into a smart object, this is the same way as kind of like dropping an anchor point, because now you will be able to duplicate this anchor point or this smart object. Let's go ahead and duplicate that, right? And then to this smart object, you will be able to do a bunch of other things. So in this one, we can go ahead and let's go ahead and say filter, blur, and Gaussian blur. So we can blur that a little bit, right? The one underneath is a little bit sharp, so we can do the same thing. So the original can also have a bit of blur. Not too much, just a tiny bit. There we go. So the second one has a bit more blur, and we can duplicate it again. So let's duplicate that. Let's remove this filter, right? And in this one, instead of adding a filter, we can add maybe a color balance or a hue saturation, right? So we can do colorize, and we can add a bit of color. Again, this is very, very random. But the point here is that I've created 3 versions of the same sort of layer because I have this anchor point, or in this case, a smart object. And the cool thing about this is that I can open up the original, which is these squiggly lines that I created. Let's actually move it around here. And then I can do whatever I want. I can just delete all of these, and then I can paint new things. So I'm gonna do some kind of like a spiral like this, and then I'm gonna save. And when I save, it automatically updates all of these 3 layers. Right? Because it is ultimately referencing the same object or the same anchor point. So I have the first one, the second one, and the third one. But this is what is really, really powerful about this process, that once you understand that you can literally reference the same object, but then change the look of it completely, it allows you to stack a bunch of different effects and in one single pass or in one single, let's say, stroke, affect all of the layers at once. So hopefully this makes sense, but don't worry if it doesn't. We're going to do it in just a second in Substance Painter. But to me, this is like the simplest thing to think about it, right? So it's the same thing as this. I'm going to toggle all of this off, and I'm going to leave only the first one, right? So I have this original layer, which is essentially my anchor point, and I have this simple mask. In fact, let's go ahead and paint this out so that we don't have anything, right? So if I do kind of like what I did in Photoshop before, right? So we have this anchor point, which I was referring before as smart object, but we're going to refer as anchor point. That's what they are. So I have this paint layer, right? So now if I go to my second layer, this is scar body. If I toggle this on and off, I'm referencing exactly the same object, the same shape, but I'm using this layer to give it some thickness or some height. And I can control how much of that height I'm actually giving, right? So that's pretty cool. Now I can have another layer, and you see that's referencing even another effect, but it's doing exactly the same thing. So it is referencing that original layer, but I'm actually affecting it a little bit more. So I'm referencing that original scar sort of tissue effect, but I'm adding a bevel smooth, I'm adding a blur, and a little bit of warp so that it has this effect. Don't worry, I'm gonna cover how to build this app. I just wanna show you that that's the power of the anchor points. And when everything works together, then you have something that looks really, really cool. So let me create a paint layer again here so we can have that ready. And again, so I just need to paint once, and it automatically updates all the layers because of that reference that we're using, which is the anchor points. All right, so hopefully that makes sense. Let's go ahead and create it from scratch. So all I have here is the base layer, which is just a generic stylized skin material that I created, but that's not the point of the tutorial. Let's go ahead and create the scar tissue. And hopefully that would explain the anchor points a bit better. So let's go ahead and start with the master mask. I'm gonna click on a fill layer and I'm gonna double click on it and I'm gonna call this one master mask. All right, now this is gonna be the master mask because I don't wanna have any effect or any channel of this layer available. So I'm gonna toggle off color as well. So basically it is nothing, like there's nothing in here. It's only gonna have a mask. So I'm gonna click on mask, add a black mask, and I'm gonna drop in straight away an anchor point, and I'm also gonna drop in an add pane. So all of that is from this magic one. Now, one important thing about anchor points is that it's only going to reference anything that is underneath that or below the anchor point. So all I need to do is put this paint underneath, and that's it. Anything that is below this anchor point, we will be able to reference it later. So I'm gonna go ahead and press the Alt key to enter into the mask, and I have the paint layer selected, just so that I can paint something here, right? And I'm using a hard brush just because I think this is the best way of setting things up so that you can reuse it in any project. And obviously, if you want to use a much more complex brush, that will give you more complex effect, but we're going to keep things simple. All right, so now all we have is a layer that has no properties, right? There's no color, there's nothing in there. A mask that has a paint layer. You don't see it because obviously we don't have anything visible. And then the reference mask. All right, so now we can create a new layer, and let's call this one scar body, and let's create a mask for it. And this is how you can reference an anchor point. Now, before I do that, I'm gonna set this up a little bit. So I'm gonna give it a bit of a color. So something like this. I'm gonna give it some height information and maybe some roughness. We're gonna change all of that later, but just something so that you can actually see the effect. Now, in the mask itself of this scar body, I'm gonna click on the magic one and I'm gonna click on add fill. So this is how you recall anchor points. You need to add a fill layer, and from this slot right here, you can actually look for the anchor points that you have in your layer stack. So you can click on grayscale and then go to anchor points. And obviously this is the only one we have in the scene. So I'm gonna click on master mask. We can also rename it. Let's rename it just master mask. There we go. And as you can see, we have those lines that we created in this layer in the master mask, but then we're recalling it in this other layer. So this is what I was trying to explain before with Photoshop in terms of the smart objects, because we can go to this paint, we can paint something, and as you can see, we are immediately recalling this in real time to this layer. So this is the layer that is giving us the roughness, the color, and the height, but we're painting in here. All right, so that is the beauty of it. All right, so now I'm just gonna go ahead and remove this and do a couple more now that we can see what we actually doing. All right, so a couple of scars in there. And obviously this looks a little bit harsh and doesn't look like a scar at all. But that's the important part. Like once you set this up, then you will be able to fine tune it. So of course I have only a paint layer, but I can go ahead and do something else, like maybe add a bevel. So we can go to the magic one. Let's click on add filter and let's click on bevel, or this bevel smooth, which is one of the recent updates of Painter. It's just a really cool filter that allows you to create a very nice effect. Now, before I tweak anything, I'm also going to show you that I have, if I get closer here from this angle, I have displacement enabled. So in the shader settings, I have displacement enabled here, and I have set the scale to 0.05. So this is why you can see a little bit of a distortion, and also the subdivision count is set to 12. So now I can just go ahead and go to the properties of this layer, and I can control how much height. So I'm going to exaggerate it to a maximum just so that you can see what the bevel smooth does. All right, now pay attention to what's going to happen, because if you understand this next bit, then you're all set with anchor points. So I'm going to open up this mask so that you can see all I have in this layer that is giving me the height information, and this color is the reference. But I'm going to go to the bevel smooth, which is below my anchor point called master mask. I'm going to select that, and then I'm going to play with the distance, and you see how in real time I can change how this looks. But once again, I'm only changing the mask and it's referencing that mask. So that's why you can see it. So I'm gonna go for a number 1 here in the curve shape so that we have this sort of like rounded, nice shape. And we can reduce the mask threshold just a tiny bit. And maybe the distance, we can increase that. Or maybe let's go for 0.07, something like that. The smoothing, we can go for something a bit higher, something like that as well. And the curve offset, that's obviously gonna change that sort of profile. So I'm gonna reduce that quite a bit. Maybe not that much, just a bit more. All right, so that looks good. And of course, this is way too high, but again, I wanted to do it so that you can see the difference. Now let's go back into our layer, the one that controls the color, height, and roughness. And we're going to reduce this quite a bit as well. So I think let's go for 0.3. All right. And let's make it a bit rougher, just a bit more. And I think I want something that looks more reddish than this. So I'm going to select this and I'm going to update that color, something like that. That's a lot better. Maybe I went a little bit overboard with the roughness. All right, something like that. Cool. So we have the basis of our scar. And you see how simple this is. Again, if I turn this off, there's nothing because we only have our master mask. But then we are referencing whatever we do in the master mask to create this effect. Now, if you can see the edges of this scar tissue, they're still a little bit harsh. So what we can do is we can blur that a little bit. So let's go again under the master mask. We can go to add filter. Let's select the blur. And then this is just a simple blur that allows us to blur that mask. So let me just show you in the mask what is happening. So again, that's holding the Alt key and clicking on the mask. So this is what we currently have. So you see a nice tiny gradient between white and black in here. But then on top of that, we have this blur that is sort of blurring that line. All right, so I just want something extra, something like that. All right, so that's looking pretty good. All right, so now we're gonna go ahead and add a little bit more of complexity and sort of fine tune the roundness of this scar. So instead of just creating a new fill layer, I'm just going to duplicate that so that we can keep that reference already. So Control D to duplicate, and let's go ahead and call this one scar top. And this is going to have a different color. So I'm gonna go for more of a lighter tone, maybe a yellowish tone. You can change all of these later. Yeah, something like this would work just fine. And obviously, because we duplicated, we are carrying all of these settings from the previous layer. So it's making things twice as tall. So I'm going to reduce that height information a little bit. And then the roughness, we're going to make it a slightly more shiny. All right. But right now, we're basically overriding things, right? So we have the red one and we have this yellow one. So what I want is to create some kind of like fade between the lighter colors here at the top of the scar and the rest of the tissue. So now we can get into the nitty-gritty of what anchor points are. So far, we've just been referencing the same thing or referencing the same anchor point, the master mask. But now we're going to take this reference and we're going to actually edit this reference. So we're going to affect it without affecting the rest. So on top of this one, we can drop in a bevel. So let's go for a bevel smooth. There we go. So you see, it is just affecting the layer that has this reference on top. So that's what I was trying to explain with the anchor points in Photoshop. So right now, what we're doing is we're actually affecting the original. So if this is the original and I were to duplicate it just one more time, this is currently what we've been doing, but now I can just go ahead and on top of this, add a new effect, which in this case would be blur, just to keep it similar to what we're doing in Painter, right? So we still have the reference to the original, but now this layer has the blur. All right, so this is gonna make more sense in just a sec. And let's go ahead and tweak this one so that it reaches only kind of like the center area. So let's go ahead and maybe reduce this, the reach of this a bit, and reduce the smoothing as well. And we can push the curve so that it maintains the same sort of idea. And the curve offset, I think we're just going to remove that. This is going to make the most difference. And maybe the threshold as well, we can reduce that as well. All right. So this is kind of like what I'm looking for, but it is very strong, the difference between the two, right? So this is where we can start playing around with something like the curvature offset, the smoothing as well, the distance. And ultimately, this threshold, I think, is an important one. All right. Now, you might not be able to achieve the result that you want just by tweaking these sliders in this case. So, for example, everything looks a little bit harsh here, and no matter what I change here, I cannot find a nice blend between the top, let's say, and the bottom, even if I keep pushing this like so, right? So what I can do is I keep adding effects. So I will build up my stack of effects for this mask. So let's do that. I'm going to add another filter, and I'm going to go for blur. And now what I'm doing, let me just go into the actual mask to show you what is happening. Just as a quick recap. So this is the reference. So this is our master mask, right? This is the only thing that I have visible. But then we added the bevel smooth on top. So we're taking this reference and we're creating this bevel just to achieve this more constrained mask. But we couldn't figure out a way with just this bevel smooth. We couldn't find a way to blur this edge, right? So what we can do is bring in a blur, and now we're blurring just this bit, okay? So that's the beauty of this workflow. All right. So I think I'm going to exaggerate this even more. And not only that, because we have separate layers, this entire layer can be set to a different blending mode. So I can go for maybe screen, and that creates a much better, much believable effect, I think. But it could be too perfect, right? So if it is too perfect, we can keep adding to the layer stack of this specific effect. So for example, in the mask, I can go ahead and add a warp. Let's just type AR, so warp, yeah. And that creates that warp effect. I'm gonna go into the mask so that you can see a little bit clearer what this looks like. And we're gonna reduce the intensity. We can also play with the source. We can reduce the tiling so that it's not as tiny. We can blur the source. We can also reduce that intensity. So I'm gonna keep things very simple, and I'm gonna show you before and after. So it's very subtle, but before, this is just the blur, and now it has this tiny distortion. Great. So now this carries on through the effect of this layer. And we can go ahead and readjust things like the height information. So we can raise this up a little bit and creates kind of like this bubble effect, right? And now that we have this, we can go ahead and create the next effect, which is kind of like that sort of hatched lines, or let's say like the connecting tissue when the scar was healing. And this is a rather simple effect. So I'm gonna show you with a new layer. And by the way, this is what I love about anchor points, that once you have the basis of it, you can still add new layers and change the effect and blend them together to create a very complex effect, but ultimately you're controlling everything from a single mask. So this to me is the most exciting part of the entire texturing setup, because once you have the basis of this anchor point, you can just keep adding and iterating to tweak that effect, but the bases are super simple. It's just a single paint layer, black and white, and then you control everything else. All right, so let's create a new layer. Let's go ahead and add the black mask, and let's add a fill layer. Again, this is something that I've already shown you. And from the grayscale, we're gonna recall the anchor point. So anchor point tab, click on master mask, and we are referencing again the same mask, right? Again, this is something I wanted to reiterate. And if you already know about anchor points, I'm sure you're already annoyed with this, but if you're not, this is one of the things that is really important to understand. This layer is on top of everything else, right? But it's only referencing this master mask. So it's not taking into account any warp or any blur that we've done in this layer, because that's only for this specific layer. So that's really, really important. Okay, so now that I referenced the original mask again with this one, what I can do is, let's go ahead and find something in this library, something that you might have access to. So directional noise, maybe? So directional noise 4, let's go for this. So I'm gonna drag and drop this right on top in here. And we can just go ahead and play with the tiling and the rotation. So I'm just gonna try to do something that is horizontal to these lines. By the way, if you were to do a horizontal scar, right, these wouldn't work, or like these lines would go horizontally, but then you can just go ahead and create, let's say, 2 materials, one for vertical scars, one for diagonal scars, and another one for, vertical ones. So it's pretty much the same thing. So I'm just gonna go ahead and find a nice balance. And I think I'm gonna increase this a bit more. So something like that. And you can play with the contrast as well. So you can see more of those lines, and the balance, maybe reduce that a little bit. So now that we have this, we need to find a way to constrain the effect of this noise or these lines to the actual mask itself, right? And this is going into the next level of control within anchor points and in general the workflow in Painter, because you can actually have blending modes for the mask. So this one right here, if you click on this dropdown, it will access all the blending modes that you have access to. So if you set it to screen, for example, it's going to pass through everything, just like in Photoshop. If you set it to multiply instead, it's going to only pass this on top of the area that you have selected. So let me just show you what that looks in the mask itself. So this is our mask, and if we take the noise that we had and we multiply it, it's only going to affect these areas. So this is probably one of the things that you could use in this case. However, I prefer something like, let's go for linear dodge or linear burn, maybe. There we go. So you see the difference is very slight towards the edges. So I'm gonna switch between that and multiply. So say the multiply gives you a very well-defined edge almost, but the linear burn is a little bit stronger because it has more contrast. So it looks a little bit more wavy, and I'm going for this more organic look. So this is better. All right. So just to recap, it's just the directional noise set to linear burn, and then you can control the balance and all of that. All right. So let's go ahead and see how this affects everything. Let's go back in here. Of course, we can change the color. So I'm going to use something like this. That's too dark. Something like that, maybe a little bit more orangey. And then I'm also going to open up the high channel here, and I'm going to push that in just to create that sort of connective tissue effect. But yeah, as you can see, this could be a bit harsh. So one thing we can do is add some blur to that as well. So go back to the mask. Let's add some blur. So add filter. Let's type blur. This one right here. And we can control, obviously, the amount of blur. So just a tiny bit. There we go. So before, after. Again, it's all about the subtleties, and we can control the height information or like the deformation that we have here with the effect of this layer. I'm also going to add the roughness channels just so that we can control those lines separately and create a bit more variation in that roughness. And finally, we can go ahead and do another layer. So let's just create a new fill layer, and let's go ahead and add a black mask. Same thing, repeating the same process, add fill. Let's connect our anchor point. There we go. So now we're referencing that same effect once more. But this time, what I want to do is create a little bit of redness around these scars. So it's kind of like the damage around those scars, because right now it's, even though it looks like a scar, I think, it's a little bit clean, and I want to be able to really damage the skin around these areas. So let's go ahead and select the color first, and I think I'm going to go for a similar orange tone. We can change all of that. In fact, I'm going to go for a blue tone, just to show you that doesn't really matter. And that probably also shows the effect that we're going to do in the mask a little bit better. And of course, because it is non-destructive, we can go back and change that as well. All right, so let's open up the mask itself. So again, this is our reference to our anchor point. I'm gonna drop in a new effect, and this time I'm gonna choose something called the outline, this one right here, the mask outline. So I'm gonna click on that. This is a fantastic, a really useful effect that allows you to look at the mask underneath, and it's going to only show you the outline of that mask. So I'm gonna go into the mask so you can see what I'm talking about. You won't see anything right now because by default the threshold is set too high. So I'm gonna reduce that, and there we go. So if you go for something less than 1, it should display already. So this is what's happening. And this is I'm gonna take a little bit of a break here from the anchor point just to show you how this works, because it is fantastic. So basically, as you can see here, this is creating an outline that goes from black to the center that is pure white and then goes back to black, right? That is because we have this start from black set to true. If we click this off and make it false, then it will look at the mask itself and will start from white, right? So let me just show you this. I'm gonna use this painting tool on top just to explain what this is. So this is the edge of the mask, right? And if I enable now the mask outline, right? Basically what this is doing, and of course we need to tweak the threshold so that it matches more like that line. There we go. But basically, leaving this set from black is going to tell the software to look at our mask, which is this one. This is our mask. And it's going to say start from black, which is this edge right here, these pixels, and then fade like so, right? But if we change that to true, it's actually going to start from the black color going up to white and then go back to black. So that's basically what this allows us to do. It's going to change things quite a bit, but it is very, very practical. So what I want to do is leave this set to true, right? Because I want to have like that white in the middle. And then what I can do is play with the threshold. So I think I'm going to go for something 0.5 just to see what it does. We can change that again as well. The width, we can also change that, make something a little bit thinner. Again, we can change all of that as well. And this looks a little bit jagged, so I'm going to add a bit of blur, just like that. And with the curve shape, we can just go ahead and reduce this so that it is less evident, or like the gradient from white to black is a little bit a bit smoother. All right, so now let's see what this is doing. Cool. So we now have that edge going around, but it is, again, too perfect, and maybe I want to push it more towards the scar itself. So again, it's all a matter of taking the mask outline, now that we know what the setup is, and we can play with things like the threshold, right? The width, all of that good stuff. But the one thing that you'll notice is that this line is very, very prominent, and it's kind of like consistent all across, and that's not very natural. So another thing we can do is we can bring in a grunge, for example. So let's try grunge. Let's try grunge rust fine. So this one is a good one. I'm going to drag and drop that on top of this. And this is just a black and white image. You can create your own. We can play with the tiling. So I'm going to increase this quite a bit so that we have enough variation, maybe 8 or something. And of course, we can increase the balance, play with the contrast a bit more. We can come back and tweak all of these later if we need to. But now we're going to blend this with everything else that we have. So I'm going to set this to multiply. And you see how this mask is actually removing some bits and pieces from this mask outline. That's all I'm doing with this. And it could be absolutely anything that you want. And now that I can see the effect, I can just go ahead and play with the balance, the contrast, the amount of grunge, and so on and so forth. And I can always go back to the outline, the width. And if you actually want to have this effect closer to the actual scar, we can go ahead and turn this off. And this is going to be a lot closer to the shape that I want, right? So I just wanted to show you the difference. All right, so let's tweak the width a little bit. and a little bit of the blur as well. All right. And we can go back to the grunge and play with the balance. All right, so you see, these are very subtle things, but they all make a difference, and it's just the compound effect of adding simple effects layer by layer. So one final thing that I want to do, just because I find that this is fading things a little bit, is to add a level. So I'm going to go to the magic one, click on levels, and I'm just going to contrast that a little bit more. Again, we can always go back and change it so that I can see it a bit better. And then I'm going to set this to be maybe like a reddish tone. Again, remember, this is meant to be kind of like the damage area. And not only that, we can also set this layer to a different blending mode itself. So the color could be something like overlay to add more contrast. There we go. And maybe make it a little bit lighter now. So think about the possibilities of this. You can make similar things for like bruising, and it's not just about skin damage, but this is a good example of what you can achieve. Now I'm going to go back to levels and adjust this a bit more because I want to have more of that redness towards the outside. And you can always take the mask outline and increase the width just to increase that effect like so. And, go back to the color itself and reduce that intensity. All right, so far so good. We've just connected a few layers and recall some anchor points. Now I'm going to show you how you can save this and repurpose it and use it in other projects, and do a quick recap of what an anchor point is. And hopefully this video has opened your eyes in terms of what you can achieve with the tools available in Painter, and especially the use of anchor points, which simplify the workflow and create really complex materials really easy. All right, so basically what we can do now that we have everything set up is, first things first, just name things properly. So this one, I will call it connecting tissue. You can come up with better names. And this one, I will call it outline damage. All right, so that way, whenever you reuse this in another project, you will be able to just know exactly where things are. Now, for the master mask, because this one actually doesn't have any effect other than the mask itself, I like to right-click and give it a color. Let's go for red, so that I know that this is where I paint my mask, right? Nothing else. All right, so the next thing is I'm going to open up the mask of the master mask, right? And I'm just going to create a new paint layer right here on top. And I'm going to type, hey, Pablo, paint here, right? So I only do this because this is for my future self. So obviously you do it for your future self, but it's just a simple layer to remind you that this is where you paint. So next time you do a new project that you're going to use these scars, you get drag and drop as smart material, and you know where you need to paint. So I just do this for myself so that I know where to paint, and now I can delete the original. So the original is the one that we use to basically set up everything. But now that we have everything in place and we have a clean mask, we can go ahead and convert this into a smart material. So I'm going to select all my layers, Control G to group them. And in the folder, I'm going to call this one PNG. By the way, this PNG, they're just my initials, and I usually do that so that I know which ones are my own assets. And I will be able to filter by PNG a lot easier. So PNG underscore scar tutorial. All right, now that we have the name, right-click the folder, and I'm going to go to create smart material. And just like that, I'm going to go ahead and go to my smart material list, and I'm going to type PNG scar tutorial. There we go. So this is the one. All right. So that means I can delete this altogether. I only have my base skin, and imagine this is a new project. I can just go ahead and drag and drop this, and we have everything set up. And I go to my red layer, the one that says master mask, and I go to, hey, Pablo, paint here, just as a reminder for myself. Click on that one, and then I can just have some fun creating some scar tissues, right? And like I said, this is the basic mode, as in we are using everything that we set up with a basic line or a basic brush, but you can do anything that you want, right? You can use any other brush and have a completely different effect. All right, so that's it for this video. Hopefully that gives you a better idea of what anchor points are and how you can use them in your workflow. And if you find cool and interesting ways of using this technique to create a bunch of different effects, join our Discord community and you will be able to share your findings and your resources, and we can create a pool of resources for every artist in the community. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so that I can let you know when the next video is up. I'll see you in the next tutorial. Cheers.